And we're going to finish up last week's lesson, which was lesson 8. And we were dealing with the conclusion of an event that involved a person from Moses' past. Who was that person? Jethro, yes. Yep, so based on the fact, a number of facts, we concluded Jethro was a key piece of evidence in determining what? The location of Sinai in Midian? Yeah, because those things are all important. And so in the scriptures, we're finishing up chapter 18, and Lord willing, we're going to work our way through chapter 20. So Jethro was involved in some things. He arrived, and he and Moses had some time together, and Moses told him all that had happened, and then that caused Jethro to react in a certain way. How did it cause him to react? By what Moses had told him. Yeah, he was praising God, right? Praising God, and eventually, as a result of this, he did something very interesting. At the conclusion of this praising, offered sacrifices, yeah. And so he did some very good things there when he and Moses were reunited, and he offered burnt offerings and other sacrifices, and then they had a meal, the elders and Aaron and Moses in the presence of God, it says. So that's where we left off. So now we head to an occasion that's very interesting, and I didn't just want to burst through this because there's a lot of wonderful principles in here that carry forward for all sorts of walks of life. And so that is found in chapter 18, verses 13 through 27. And let's just read that. And it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. How many people are there, approximately? A couple million, maybe, right? And the people stood about Moses from the morning until evening. Now, when Moses' father-in-law saw that all he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Okay, so we have an efficiency problem right here, don't we? Who's it affecting? It's affecting Moses? Just Moses? You ever wait in the line all day at the DMV? A little frustrating? Do you? Shalom. So, go in peace. So it's affecting everybody, but Jethro's primarily concerned with whom? With his son-in-law. So why do you alone sit as judge from morning till evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws." Now, what does this imply? Hierarchy? Okay. They trusted Moses? Okay. There's laws to obey. All these things, absolutely. It implies that he felt he was the only qualified one at this point, right? Doesn't it imply that? Now, do you think it was from a point of arrogance? Probably not. Probably not. It's one of those things where he felt a great need to do it, and he wanted to honor the people and God's word and make sure that they were settling disputes in a godly fashion. But he kind of get caught up in it, just kind of doing the day-to-day what you feel is necessary, and before you know it, you're completely underwater. So, in Moses, verse 17, father-in-law said to him, the thing that you're doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I shall give you counsel, and God be with you. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God. Then teach them the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work they are to do. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, and men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place them over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that every major dispute that they will bring to you, but every minor dispute they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all the people will go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. A difficult dispute they would bring to Moses, but every minor dispute they themselves would judge. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went away into his own land. So, question that I have for you. When it says, then teach them the statutes in verse 20 and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work they are to do, who's he speaking to? Who is Jethro saying should be taught? The judges themselves? Everybody but the judges?
No, everybody but the judges are.
Okay. Why everybody? Teach the people. What benefit is it that all the people know what the statutes are? Well, I mean, we're talking about things like, so that they don't sin, but this is also that because they're like, well, we know what God ought to, let's just handle this ourselves, right? Because we know the right way. See, the more people mature in Christ, the more that they know what God's laws are, the better able to be able to settle disputes among themselves, right? It's maturity. So you teach all the people, but still, even so, you're still going to have disputes, right? And so there were to be ones that they said to appoint and to handle these things. Now what happens, this dynamic just doesn't apply to judicial matters, does it? This dynamic, does it apply just to things where disputes need to be settled? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this concept ought to permeate all sorts of walks of life. Where could this concept be beneficial? In the church, absolutely. Because what do we find a lot of times in the church? One person knows everything and everybody else comes to them because they don't know nothing, right? Right? I mean, that's how that things are structured in such a way that all the people got that an individual or very few individuals have all the knowledge and power. And if that's the case, that you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems, aren't you? So definitely in the church, everybody ought to know, and it shouldn't all fall upon one individual. It should be a plurality. I think that's why we have an eldership that in the Lord's church, is that the weight. Now we're talking millions of people, thousands of people, but even in a congregation such as ours, it never should all fall on one person. And where else could this fall? These dynamics be helpful? But what about your workplace? You guys ever worked for somebody that had to do everything themselves and control everything themselves and never delegated to anybody. Nobody else learned. But everything rose or fell on that one individual. Am I the only one? Okay, so what happens in the workplace when that happens? It's people don't learn, they don't grow, they get frustrated, right? But if you delegate and share responsibility and knowledge, what happens? People grow and the organization as a whole is more healthy, right? These principles and dynamics. What about in a family? That's why I didn't just want to blow through this in the last couple of minutes, because to me, there's tons of wisdom here. So, in our notes on page 8 from last week's lesson, we kind of just sum up some things here. If you go there the next day, Jethro observed these things, and then point 1, Jethro was dumbfounded. Yeah, okay. Why are you doing this? Man, this is something. Witnessed it all day long. Surely everybody was exhausted and frustrated. He had some advice and told them what to do. Now, the appointees should possess 3 qualifications. They should fear God. They should be trustworthy men. They should hate dishonest gain. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? What's that? Yeah, it does. There's a lot of overlap there, right? A lot of overlap. A lot of overlap. So Jethro concluded that there would be 2 positive benefits from this arrangement. First, the people would be satisfied, and second, Moses would be able to stand the strain of his office. Moses accepted the wise counsel of Jethro, but the plan was not implemented immediately. According to Deuteronomy chapter 1, 9 through 15, judges were selected after the law was given at Sinai a few weeks later. Now, why would that have been a good idea? To hold off. To teach the people, okay? So if they got everybody trained in this one thing, and then a month later, a few weeks later, now we're going to be trained in all this other stuff, you see what I'm saying? They had certain statutes and things that were already in play, right? But what we're going to study tonight, everything is about to change. And so it makes sense, whether it was Moses knew something was coming or God let him in on, don't do this just yet. It's a great idea. But just once we have everything in place, then we can train everybody in this and settle those disputes. Because so much of what we're going to read that's in these precepts that follow the 10 Commandments are how people relate to one another. And what you're to do if this happens. What if you accidentally kill somebody's donkey? Stuff like that. Right? Okay, so it was wise for them to wait until the law was given. Jethro elected to return to his own land. Now, does this mean that they weren't in Midian? His own land was Midian, right? So does that mean that they weren't in Midian at this time? It says to return to his own land? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah, so there's different ways to refer to localities. If you're in Europe and you say, I'm returning to my own land, that could mean America, right? For us, if we were overseas, we say, I'm returning to my homeland or my own land, that could mean America. It could mean Hanover. It could mean a specific plot of ground, right? So don't let this sway us from believing that they're not in Midian at this time. Moses sent his father-in-law on his journey by traveling a short distance with him. So that is the conclusion there of lesson 8. We're fixing to move into lesson 9. Has everybody got lesson 9? I know we had some come in. Don and Kayla, do you have lesson 9? You guys good? Okay. You want one? Okay. 2, 1, 2, 1, 1. Okay, so here's a question as we get started. When I ask you this question, what immediately comes to mind is what I want us to share. So my question is this: how did the people receive and know the 10 Commandments? Through Moses? So Moses brought the commandments down, and that's how they were made aware of them. That's the concept that we have, right? Moses goes up on the mountain, he gets the commandments, he comes down, and he shares it with the people, right? Isn't that the image we have in our head? Would it bother you if I told you you're wrong? That's the image I had in my head. So I was right there with you. That's not how they received the commandments initially. All right, let's go. So a nation must have a constitution and law to govern it. The only law ever revealed from heaven was received by Israel at Mount Sinai. When it says the only law, it's talking about a law that would govern. This is basically a constitution for how they were to govern themselves. I mean, it's more to it than that, but it's taking and categorizing a lot of the, remember we said a lot of these things were already in effect. How many of the commandments were in effect prior to the giving of the 10 commandments, did we say? How many of them were in effect? 10. Remember? It was 10 because what happened before the giving of the 10 commandments? We're saying, when you say 9, it's because you're setting what aside? The Sabbath, but was that in play before the 10 commandments? Because of the manna. Remember the manna? Okay, so that now, in essence, it was already in play prior to, so all 10 now we're going to talk about. We talked about in our covenants, in our Out with the Old, In with the New on Sunday night T3 study, we talk about that 9 of the 10 carried forward as far as specifically mentioned in the New Testament. So the only law ever revealed from heaven was received by Israel at Mount Sinai. The rabbis counted 613 specific injunctions in the law, 248 positive commands, and 365 prohibitions. The Scripture indicates at least 6 reasons for the revelation of this law. The law revealed God's glory and holiness. The law manifested the sinfulness of man. The law marked Israel as God's chosen people. The law gave Israel a godly standard by which they might continue to inhabit Canaan. It presented Israel or prepared Israel for the coming promised seed. And the law illustrated in various forms and ceremonies the person and work of Jesus Christ. So, a brief summary of at least six reasons, there's more, for the revelation of this law. In the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, they came to the desert of Sinai. They encamped in front of the mountain to await word from God. Now the date is given in 19:1 because of the importance of what follows. So let's see what's happening as we begin here in chapter 19. Now I hope for you that as we think about what's occurring here, that the documentary that we studied would be beneficial in helping us to kind of visualize the place and what it may have looked like and what was taking place. And it has been for me as I've studied this passage in chapter 19 and 20. So chapter 19, verse 1, in the 3rd month after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I shall come to you in a thick cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you. a little clue. And may also believe in you forever. Then Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. The Lord also said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, beware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, be ready, for the third day do not go near a woman. So it came about on the third day, when it was morning, that there were thunder and lightning flashes and a thick cloud upon the mountain and a very loud trumpet sound, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. So let's stop there for now. So in Exodus 19, Moses made 3 trips into Mount Sinai. In each case, he came back with a message from the mount. So the first one is this. It's a message of challenge. The first time Moses ascended Sinai, God spoke and Moses listened. The Lord directed Moses to first take a challenge back to his people. The basis of the challenge is set forth in 19:4. So when we say the basis of the challenge, what we're saying here is this is God's reasoning why they need to do what he says. He's laying out his reasons why they ought to do these things for the next 3 days. So the basis of the challenge says this. He says, it explains his power. It's God's power. My power is the reason why you ought to accept this challenge, what I did to the Egyptians. And we also see the basis here is God's protection, that I bore you on eagle's wings. That imagery is one of protection and care. And then also God's patience, that he brought you unto myself. So the basis of the challenge is set forth in 19:4. Now God set forth a twofold condition to the challenge and a threefold promise. So there's 2 things, there's 2 conditions and 3 promises that will result if those conditions are met. So now, these words, which we read in verses 5 and 6. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. See, there's some here that say that this is the center and theme of the entire Pentateuch. The entire Pentateuch. That this verse here is a summary verse of the entire Pentateuch. The twofold condition was this: obey God's voice and keep God's covenant. So at this point, to obey God's voice, would they understand what that meant? Okay? So at this point, what commandments do they have? The things we've talked about, right? The principles that have always been in place since day one. And there's other things that we may not specifically know about. But this is talking, once you receive what I'm about to give you, this is the conditions that are going to be placed upon it. What covenant is in play right now? With these people, what covenant is in play? What covenant have they agreed to at this point? They're not in covenant relationship right now, are they? Abraham. God made a covenant with Noah and Abraham, but did he make a covenant yet with these people specifically? Not yet. So these are things coming. The things that are about to happen here, the conditions are going to be you obey my voice and you keep my covenant. This covenant we're about. So they should know we're about to enter into a covenant with God. Now here's the promise that would come out of that covenant. That they would be God's special possession. That they would be a kingdom of priests and they would be a holy nation. So that would be the twofold condition and the threefold promise of what was about to happen. So Moses went back and challenged the elders with the words of God. Speaking for the people, the elders expressed their commitment to do everything the Lord had spoken. So there was a message of challenge, and there was also, in verses 9 through 15, a message of consecration. So Moses returned to the mount with the answer of the people. Again, the divine monologue was recorded. Now the Lord indicated that when he spoke to Moses, a thick cloud would come down upon the mount. The glory of God was thus concealed so that the people could come close enough and be able to hear his voice when he spoke with Moses on the mountain. God spoke to Moses within earshot of the people so that he might underscore the authority of his servant. So I'll ask you again, how did the people get the 10 Commandments? From God's mouth to their ear. The first time it happened, they heard it. Now, did Moses come down with tablets? Much later. But not right here. You'll see that the first time that they were given, there were no tablets. There's no tablets yet. And the first set of tablets that Moses came down with, he smashed. Now, how long was Moses on the mountain before he come down and smashed those tablets? 40 days and 40 nights. So we've got a long period of time from what we're about to see here after the conclusion of these 3 days until Moses comes down with the initial set of tablets. Now, what's fascinating, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you this, and we'll review it, but what's fascinating is that every covenant has a covenant document. And so, between that and Moses coming down with the tablets, which were to be the covenant documents, the people passed through the blood. We're going to see that. So they had sacrificed animals and split them in two and gathered the blood, and the people passed through and were sprinkled with that blood. That is them signing that they're entering into the covenant officially with God. After that came the tablets. And that's pretty cool. So, now, but the initial giving of this was from God's mouth to their ear. The people heard God's voice. When we get to the Decalogue, which is a fancy term for the 10 Commandments, Decalogue, they heard it with their own ears, which makes what even worse? What Aaron and they did with the golden calf, to me that makes it even worse. I mean, if they see all this stuff that's happening and Moses goes up there and didn't come down for a long time, he comes down with the tablets and they don't even know what they say yet. But they already knew because they heard from God's own voice, don't do this. And then the knuckleheads did it. So, he spoke to Moses within earshot. Now, Moses returned immediately to the people and spent the next 2 days consecrating them for the descent of God on Sinai. Now, Israel's response to God's first word at Sinai was verbal. Their first response was verbal. We will do all that you say. Their second response to his word was to concrete action. And so this concrete action, they were to symbolize their consecration by 3 things. By washing their clothes, by abstaining from sexual relations for 3 days, and they would also restrict their movements. So those were the things that were to be concrete actions that would consecrate, sanctify them, set them apart for what was about to happen. Get them in the right frame of mind and in the right place. Now, the mount was to be off limits. Any who came near the mount, even animals, were to be stoned or shot through with arrows. Only when the ram's horn sounded was it safe for them to go up the mountain. Now, hopefully you recall that the place that they found in what we were saying is Midian, that there were barriers still to this day around and an altar at the foot of the mountain. markers that were placed all around the foot of the mountain that were still remaining that would have marked this spot. Don't go any further. Now, what also is interesting when we talk about what's going to happen, God descending on the mountain, about that, the way that mountaintop looked, scorched. Okay, now we have a message of caution. So we read through verse 18. Let's read 18 through 25. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire, right? And its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down and warn the people lest they break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." And Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you did warn us, saying, 'Set bounds about the mountain and consecrate it.' Then the Lord said to him, 'Go down and come up again, you and Aaron with you, but do not let the priest and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break forth upon them.' So Moses went down to the people and told them." Now there was a word that appeared 2 times that probably ought to make you go, huh? Anybody go, huh? One word that appears 2 times that ought to make you a little bit puzzled. So, we'll get there in a second. What'd you say? Priests. What priests? We'll talk about it here in a minute. So, a message of caution. The people spent the better part of 3 days preparing to meet God. On the morning of the 3rd day, a theophany occurred. Now, what's theophany? Okay, it's a visible manifestation of God, and that where it's Him in that manifestation. So, in this account of Moses' life, we've already had one of these, at least one, more than one actually. What were some examples of theophanies that have occurred to this point in the life of Moses? Burning bush, clouds, pillar of cloud and fire, right? Said the Lord went before them in the pillar of fire and of cloud. And now we have this. So there were 5 signs that accompanied this manifestation: thunder and lightning, a thick cloud on the mount, an exceedingly loud sound of a trumpet, fire and smoke, and an earthquake. This had to be quite the scene. I mean, this had to be absolutely incredible. Yeah. Moses led the trembling people forward to the base of the mount. The prophet spoke to God, and God answered him. Moses was called again into the mount. The Lord instructed him to once again warn the people about attempting to break through the barriers at the foot of the mountain. Now, in verse 21, then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish." You know what idea I get there? In the movie A Bug's Life, there's 2 little bugs flying out near this little trailer, and there's a bug zapper on the front porch, and they're flying along, and he's like, "Don't look at the light." And he's like, "I can't help it, it's so beautiful." Right? And then he hits it and zaps and falls down. So I kind of get that idea of like that it would be something that would, if they were able to see it, it would draw them to it, but it would be to their detriment in this case. And so C.S. Lewis has a quote, something to the effect of, in the presence of God's pure holiness, that it draws people to, not it's something that draws people to Him, and I think that's kind of what we have illustrated here. So So Moses was called again. The Lord instructed him and once again warned the people. Now those who saw Yahweh on the mount would die. Now even priests must consecrate themselves before they approach the Lord, or he would break forth in wrath against them. What priests? It's a little puzzling, isn't it? He went home. He did. Aaron's a priest already? That is one speculation, is that the leaders in this, we're still in what age here? Patriarchal age. So some think it could be the leaders of families. Some think it could be, Lynn, to give you credit, that it could be those who were the priest designates, the ones that were going to be. Some think it could be the firstborn, because they'd already been set apart, right, to God? How had the firstborn been set apart? Through the last plague, right? In the Passover. So through the last plague, God, because of delivering them, now had claim upon the firstborn. So some think it could be that. And some think it could be those like Melchizedek, not him. The Levites come from the line of Aaron. It's not necessarily firstborn. It's any male Levite. Right. What's that? Correct. Yeah, so it's by birth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So now this kind of indicates, it kind of assumes that whoever these people are, they might claim some sort of, I can go do this. Yeah, so, maybe I can go up and have a look. You see, because it said, no, not even you. Specific, you don't cross. So there's like some, like privilege maybe that they would have claimed, that they're warning them, don't try it. Don't try it. Now Moses was confident that the barriers erected around the mountain were sufficient to keep the people away. Oh, another thing too, it could have been someone like Jethro, because he, we talk about the priest of Midian. It could have been someone like him, but that would be similar to Melchizedek. That would fall under that same, that they're not according to a line, that somehow they were established as a priest to God before all this. Question? Well, if you look in verse 24, Aaron came up with them. So in verse 24, Moses and Aaron did go up together. So he was able to. You mean instead of Moses? That is true. So Aaron was born before the decree to kill all the male boys, right? So he would have been an older toddler by now, and not. So he would have remained a Hebrew all along. And so, looking back on it from God's providential preparation point of view, Moses was able to spend a great deal of time in the Egyptian culture. And then he was able, after that, 40 years, to spend time in Midian in that culture, and all those things prepared him uniquely for this job. Could God have worked it out so that Aaron could have been that one? Possibly. But we could postulate a lot of other individuals could have been, but I think it's basically because Moses was the perfect one for this job, and God raised him up in such a way so that would happen, ordering circumstances. Good question. So, the Lord directed Moses to bring Aaron into the mount. Once again, he warned Moses that no one, priest or people, should attempt to come up to the Lord. The tip of Sinai had become a holy of holies, into which only Moses and Aaron, the future high priest, might enter. Kind of neat to think of it in that way. Now Moses returned to the camp and told the people what the Lord had said at this point. Now, here we begin Exodus chapter 20, and what some fancy theologians have termed the Decalogue. Now we're going to talk about principles of the law, and this is going to take us through the rest of our lesson tonight. I don't know if we'll get through all this or not, but Exodus chapter 20 records how God spoke the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and how people responded to that heavenly voice. So in verses 1 through 17, God spoke directly to the people in this chapter. The God of Sinai first identified himself in three ways. So we're going to see that as we read here in chapter 20, verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God. So that word Lord, we know is what? It's Yahweh. Yeah. Yahweh. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You know what? I have a question for you before we get into this. Well, once we start to break these down individually, I'll ask that question. But before, well, let's go ahead and read through them, and then we'll ask the question. Okay, you shall have no other gods before me, verse 3. You shall not make for yourselves an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land in which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. If you have kill, you need to cross it out and put murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Let's stop right there. So, would someone look up Matthew chapter 22, verse 37? Who's got it? Who's going to read them? Phil? No? Danny?
He said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind.
Okay, go ahead and read 39.
Second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay. Now, when it's talking about that, it says that all the law is summed up in these two statements. And if you turn over to page 5, they've got a little chart for you at the bottom. If you look at the bottom, you'll see summarized there, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Duty to man, duty to God, protection of, protection of. Now, I want you to think about this as we look through these 10 things. Think about our society. Think about our governments. Think about the way that our world is. And then think about these commands. And think about it from tactical perspective of evil. What is attacked in our world? And these are the specific 10 things that sum up all the law and the prophets. And then those 2 verses that we just read in Matthew are a summary of all those things. And then we'll see, just think about these things as we go through. So, it really struck me. So, no other gods. No other gods. Now, this command is fundamental to all other. There's a reason this one's first. There's a reason this one's first. Because it's truly fundamental to all others. The who of worship is emphasized here. The assumption is that it is possible to worship surrogates for God. It is possible. Such worship is at times attractive, and man has a tendency in this direction. So it's saying, you shall have no other gods before me. Do not worship anything but me, the Lord God, Yahweh. Right? And this implies that it's possible to worship something else, that this worship is attractive, and that men have a tendency toward it. You know what New Testament passage I'm reminded of immediately when I think about this? Is Romans chapter 1. Where we say that man, because of their desire to sin, have exchanged the truth of God for a lie and have worshipped the creature rather than the Creator. That whole, the way chapter 1 breaks it down, explains this. And it's interesting that the major warnings that come out of Romans 1 deal with sexual sin. When we talk about worshiping something else, people will devise a system of worship that allows them to do what they want to do sexually. And boy, oh boy, don't we see that in our world. You want to know what I saw last night? And I was sick to my stomach. Was an ad for a new drug. Now, there's been one that's out. I don't remember the name of it, but now there's a rival one that rivals this. This drug is to be given as a preventative for HIV. This commercial, the first one I've seen, there were undertones as to who this is for. The new one that I saw for this new product was in your face. It had drag queens. It had guys kissing. Think about this. We've devised a drug so that you can live this lifestyle. And it was, one of these days, if you haven't seen it, it probably will show. I want to show it just so you can see. That's the world we live in. But people will devise a worldview belief system in order to justify, and that's what Romans 1 says. And we see that throughout the Bible, don't we? Is this new? This has gone on since day one. So no other gods. No graven images. Now the second word, when he says word, when Doc Smith's writing here, and most of this is taken directly from his stuff, when he's writing here, when he says word, he means command. So if you see this second word, this second command, this second word or commandment spoke to the how of worship. So the first one spoke of who, and this is how. The God of Sinai was invisible, and no attempt was to be made to represent him in any way. They were not to bow down, i.e. show respect for, let alone worship such images. Now, you know what passage of Scripture I think of on this one every single time when we talk about worshiping graven images is the passage in Isaiah that talks about the feller that chops down a tree. Right? And what's he do with that tree? Half of it he uses for what? Cook his dinner. And as his dinner's cooking, what's he do? Fashions an idol out of the other part of it, and then he falls down and worships it when he's all done. Now, what's interesting is we understand this, in the temple and the tabernacle, there was quite a bit of religious art that was permitted. But is art idolatry? No. Now, let's ask ourselves this question. Are there objects of worship in our world today that become idols? Objects of worship. What about, my mind goes to Catholicism right away. When we talk about the actual items and relics and rosaries and very superstitious in nature about things, right? So, no graven images. The second word was about the how. They were not to bow down. The religious art was permitted, for it was abundant in the tabernacle and the temple. But the intent here is to prohibit idolatry. Now, a reason is attached to this prohibition. So there's a reason given in this passage as to why God says no graven images. What was that reason? For I am a jealous God. Well, I thought jealousy was a sin. Is it not one of the 7 deadly sins? Is it listed in there? I think it is. So it's a bad one, right? So does that mean God is saying that he is by nature sinning? So God can do what he wants. Righteous anger, righteous jealousy. Okay, how so? How does this play out? Y'all hear that? But, okay, what's the basis of that? Love? Okay, just to put it bluntly, you want what belongs to you. Yeah, I mean, that belongs to you. You want what belongs to you. Now, what belongs to God? So he desires what is rightfully his. Right? And so that's definitely a righteous jealousy. What jealousy speaks of being a sin is a lot tied to covetousness, meaning that you want what does not rightfully belong to you. And there's a very interesting dynamic about the 10th commandment, which is fascinating here in a little bit, which we're probably not going to get to tonight. So, Yahweh is a jealous God and will accept no rival. He does not tolerate divided allegiance. Think of it in those terms. When you think of divided allegiance being idolatry, ooh, that ought to make you nervous. Why ought that make you nervous? If we think of idolatry in terms of divided allegiance, that ought to make us nervous. Why? Okay, lukewarm. 1 foot out, 1 foot in. Okay. So when we talk about divided allegiance, what are some of the things that our world has constructed that call for our allegiance? Okay, we've talked about that before, right? So governments can call for allegiance that takes us away from God, right? Is that present anywhere in the world today? Right? We've talked about this before. What else can call for our allegiance? Our families. Can you be allegiant to your family that takes you away from being allegiant to God? if you value the word of man over the word of God, if as far as, well, I don't want to upset them. You see where that ought to make us, and then all the things in our world that are designed to pull us away. We talked about leisure before on a Sunday night, right? Could we be, our allegiance be taken to a commitment to leisure? There's a lot of things that take our commitment, so we ought to be real careful.
What about allegiance
To false doctrines? Sure. Yeah, the word, the traditions and word of man, yeah, we better be real careful. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah.
They know the word's what it is, but they don't follow it because their family goes to that.
Sure. Absolutely. That happens a lot. Now, here's something interesting here in this scripture. What does this mean? Those who continue to hate him face his wrath even to the fourth generation. So does that mean if I sin, they're held directly responsible 4 generations after me? I thought people were guilty of their own sin. What does this mean?
Whatever happens here is going to affect them up to their fourth generation. What if something happens to me right now that affects my whole family?
Okay.
How can you?
Certainly. So this is speaking of the earthly consequences. Sure. Certainly. Now, those individuals still have a choice. I mean, it's just like anything else. But I think what it's teaching here is that these type of, that idolatry has far-reaching consequences. Generational consequences. Now, individuals within those generations can always choose God, but they're, you know, it doesn't mean that if I were to go home and worship an idol, that the next 4 generations are doomed. But see, on the flip side, it says, those who love him and keep his commandments experience God's love throughout their generations. So things have generational consequences. Consequences. All right. Well, I want to point something out right here. That on that chart, that we basically have a division there. Some divide it, the first 4 and then the next 6. Along these lines, that the first 4 are, and then here Doc Smith has divided these first 5, second 5. And so, but there definitely is a division when you see, and I like the way duties to God and duties to man, but also the protection of. Now, think about this. The protection of certain things, and then find out what's being attacked. So, when we talk about don't murder, that's protecting life. What's being attacked in our world today? Sanctity of life. Adultery is to protect the sanctity of what? Marriage. What is being attacked in our world today? Yeah, marriage. The true definition of marriage. You look at all these different things. Property. This one you have to think a little harder, I think. When you talk about do not steal, what is that something that's an issue in our world here today? Just from people breaking in and stealing things? That obviously, I'm thinking on a grander scale. Our government's right. Remember we talked about that? Can the state steal? Oh yeah. And we're currently in an age where we're trying to push it to where they can steal more. Right? I mean, think about Venezuela, right? 15, 20 years ago, it was the 2nd or 3rd richest country in the world. Now it's incredible. So you think about lying and coveting and all the things. Is coveting in our world, is it promoted or frowned upon? promoted, right? Oh, man. Yes, you deserve, you should have. Everything is designed, it promotes. You think about everything here in our world is diametrically opposed to these 10 things. Our foe is formidable. But it doesn't mean we can't win battles, and it doesn't mean we know we're going to win the war. It's already been won. But isn't it fascinating to think about these 10 fundamental things, and then in the public square, get them out. Take these things out. Why? Because it's everything that our world is trying to be right now. They don't want anything to do with any of this. Okay, so we'll pick back up at the top of page 5 with the third commandment. So we got through a whole 2 there. So we got some more to go. All right, any questions, comments?